What happens when a government systematically dismantles the intellectual life of its own people? Not through bombs, not through book burning, but through something far more subtle and far more dangerous. This is the story of Uganda's intellectual death, and why it matters to every single one of us. The human brain is not a single-lane road. It has infinite dimensions: technical, moral, spiritual, intellectual, ecological, political. Ancient Uganda's 15 traditional nations understood this. Their education was not confined to textbooks and classrooms. It was woven into poetry, music, ritual, and storytelling. Every dimension of the mind was activated. What was taught was difficult to forget, because it was integrated into the whole of life. But modern systems? They chose a different path. They developed one dimension, called it specialization, and left the rest to die. Not everyone with a university degree is an intellectual. We must be very clear about this. An academic operates within institutions, publishing papers, climbing career ladders. A scholastic guards established orthodoxy. A careerist uses education for personal advancement. But an intellectual engages with public issues, challenges power, produces knowledge that transforms society, thinks across all boundaries, and speaks to the whole of humanity. Uganda once had such voices: Oli Mazrui, Mahmood Mamdani, David Rubadiri, giants who ranged across politics, history, culture, and international relations with breathtaking confidence. Where are those voices today? When Uganda had only one university, Makerere, academic scholarship and public intellectualism moved together. They were inseparable. The university was not an ivory tower. It was society's engine of self-understanding. Then came 1986. The national resistance movement emerged from the Luwero bushes with a concept: ideological refinement, guided by the gun. In Kiswahili, they called it makoka makoka. The message was unmistakable. The gun precedes the word. Military discipline precedes intellectual inquiry. Party loyalty precedes critical thought. When I joined Makerere in 1991 to teach, I watched it happening in real time. A new machinery of intellectual suppression was being assembled quietly, methodically, and with devastating effect. Every year, students completing Senior 6 are taken to the National Leadership Institute at Kyankwanzi. On the surface, they are taught for noble principles: patriotism, Pan-Africanism, socio-economic transformation, and democracy. But listen to what is actually being said. NRM Vice Chairperson Godfrey Kiwanda Subi told youth at Kyankwanzi in June 2025 that they must be oriented on our culture as a party and understand the effort of President Museveni. Party culture becomes national culture. Presidential interest becomes national interest. Questions become betrayal. And this model is being exported. Uganda has signed agreements to train South Sudan's leaders at Kyankwanzi, ensuring, as they put it, that parties are run by ideologically grounded people, not intellectually grounded, ideologically grounded. There is a catastrophic difference. The deintellectualization of Uganda is not accidental. It operates through 6 interlocking mechanisms. First, appointment of NRM cadres to sensitive university positions. Political reliability replaces intellectual distinction. Second, surveillance. Academics learn that speaking out carries risks. Promotion requires silence on sensitive issues. The chilling effect is real. Third, economic pressure. Academics are underpaid. They take consultancies, extra teaching loads. No time remains for the unpaid work of public thought. Fourth, careerism is deliberately rewarded. International publications bring promotions. Local intellectual engagement, nothing. Fifth, public intellectual spaces were briefly opened in the NRN's early years. Venues like Club Obligato hosted genuine debates. After the regime had read the national mood and consolidated power, these spaces were quietly allowed to disappear. Into that space stepped what I can only call nincompoops and ignoramuses, people whose qualification was loyalty, not thought. Sixth, and most devastating, the conspiracy of silence. Academics know what is happening. They remain quiet, not because they are forced to, but because the system has made silence the rational choice. The most visible result of all this suppression is what we must honestly call the educated fool. A person with credentials but no critical capacity, a degree but no wisdom, technical skills but no moral compass, information but no understanding. Uganda's universal primary education and universal secondary education programs have expanded access, and that is a genuine achievement. But expansion without intellectual quality, without investment in critical thinking, without protection of intellectual space, produces quantity without quality. Overcrowded classrooms, underqualified teachers, rote-based curricula, examination-oriented pedagogy. These do not develop intellectual capacity. They produce graduates who can follow instructions but cannot think independently, who can fill positions but cannot create possibilities. Uganda today is full of educated fools. They sit in government, in universities, in corporations, in civil society, certificates on the wall, nothing growing in the mind. This is not misfortune. This is the predictable output of a system specifically designed to produce compliance rather than thought. While we focus on universities, we have lost something irreplaceable: the tradition of rural intellectuals. There was a time when every community had thinkers, elders who understood deep patterns of nature and society, storytellers who preserved collective wisdom, healers who integrated knowledge of plants, spirits, and human psychology. These were intellectuals in the fullest sense. They thought deeply. They preserved and transmitted what generations needed to survive. Formal education, with its privileging of written over oral knowledge, of modern over traditional ways, has systematically delegitimized rural intellectualism. Young people learn to despise the wisdom of their elders. Communities lose their capacity for collective self-understanding. We have traded living wisdom for paper degrees. The picture is grim, but despair is not an option. First, governance must fundamentally change. Authoritarianism is the enemy of thought. When power is concentrated and unquestionable, intellectual life withers. Uganda must move from propagandism and violence-rich governance to negotiated governance, where leaders earn respect rather than demand loyalty. Second, freedom to think must be real, not just written into constitutions, but experienced in daily life. Freedom from surveillance, from fear, from ideological conditioning that closes the mind before it opens. Third, The surveillance apparatus inside universities must be dismantled. Academics cannot think freely when watched. Students cannot develop intellectually when questioning carries risk. Fourth, public intellectual space must be rebuilt. Universities must host regular public debates. Media must provide genuine platforms. The digital revolution offers new possibilities, but online, space must be protected from the same forces that closed physical space. Fifth, Uganda needs transdisciplinarity and team sciences. The great challenges we face, climate change, inequality, technological disruption, ecological collapse, cannot be solved by single disciplines. We need new sciences for wholesale living. Sciences that break down walls between knowledge systems and integrate indigenous wisdom with modern methods. Sixth, entirely new institutions of higher learning designed for the digital world, not modeled on colonial universities built for a world of stable knowledge, but open, integrative, publicly engaged institutions that develop all dimensions of the mind and judge intellectual work by its contribution to society, not merely by its publication count. A society without intellectuals is a society without self-understanding. It stumbles from crisis to crisis, never learning, never shaping its own future. A passive object of forces beyond its control. A society with suppressed intellectuals has made a terrible trade. Short-term stability for long-term vitality. The appearance of order for the substance of thought. But a society with thriving intellectuals. That society can understand itself, critique itself, and transform itself. Navigate change without losing its bearings. Engage the world without losing its soul. The systematic deintellectualization of Uganda since 1986 has been a tragedy, but it is not irreversible. The intellectual hunger of the Ugandan people, frustrated but not eliminated, can be fed. The task is enormous, but the alternative, continuing deintellectualization, ever more educated fools, ever less capacity for genuine thought, is unthinkable. Uganda's future depends on its intellectuals. It is time to rebuild. This analysis was written by Oweyegha-Afunaduula, one of Uganda's most courageous public intellectuals. If this conversation matters to you, share it, because silence is what they're counting on.